I have a story for you today about ballroom dancing. But it starts back when I was first coming out of college and thinking about my first job, because I had been following a pretty familiar script up to that point. And so, not to be outdone by everybody else I seemed to know at the time, I decided I was off to the big city to get my start on Wall Street. Which in reality, of course, looks more like this. And from there, things did not go according to plan. Because while nobody exactly enjoys life as a junior investment banker, for me, it was just a uniquely terrible fit. I was so miserable at this, in fact, that when my 2 years were up and my peers were all going off to work at hedge funds, my next move was to do this. Quite literally, ran away with the circus. My parents freaked. People thought I had completely lost my mind, which I kind of had. But this transition really plunged me into some messy topics that I had never given much thought to before. Because a lot of my time on the trapeze rig was spent teaching classes. And I was getting this fascinating look at people's temperaments on display. Some timid, some very fearless. Some people struggle with trust. Others have a hard time listening. Some people would get so close and then give up. And so that environment really drove home for me that discomfort, abject terror even, is a really powerful teacher. And that these social and personal barriers we have can move, but they rarely do so off at arm's length. And these ideas have really formed the basis of the work that I've been doing ever since. Because I was loving my new career as an aerialist, but I also realized very quickly that I was still going to need a day job, so I started working for a program called Dancing Classrooms, which was sort of an institution in New York City by that point. And if you've ever seen one of these three movies, Mad Hot Ballroom in particular, then you already know a bit about what we do. But we're known for going into fifth grade classrooms in public schools, and for 10 weeks, making the kids learn ballroom dancing with their regular classmates and teachers. This is as a required part of the school day. So if you give me an hour with a room full of fifth graders, at the end, you'll have this. If you give me about 18 hours, they'll look something like this. Now, I've tried explaining this to a lot of people over the years. And the typical reaction tells me that we're mostly still in this mindset of, okay, that's cute, but it's just dancing. They learn some moves, there's a recital at the end, and that's it. And that tells me that when most people look at this and they just see the foxtrot, then they're seeing a nice to have, when they should be seeing a must have. See, we don't teach dance. We teach life skills. And there are a lot of great ways you can try to do this, especially for kids. Sports, music, meditation, can be up in the air, down in the ground, but there's a lot. However, it turns out ballroom dance is really one of the best. Because it's mentally and physically engaging, yes, but most importantly, it puts people way out of their comfort zone in a way a lot of other things don't. There's no getting around the maturity it takes to stand close to someone and touch them. And these are interpersonal skills that we know matter enormously in the real world. But they often fall by the wayside in a school system that is increasingly preoccupied, more than ever before, with relentlessly teaching academic skills. Primarily because that's what we know how to measure reliably. But we should be a little concerned about this, because the evidence is really mounting that it's social and emotional learning that makes a huge difference in student outcomes. One study quantified a gain of about 11 percentile points on standardized tests among students who had targeted social and emotional programming interventions in schools. We're learning that non-cognitive skills, abilities like self-control, motivation, are key predictors of achievement, and that they may matter even more than talent. So the question really becomes the extent to which we can teach all this. And I want to walk you through what that looks like in one of my classrooms. Because, disclosure, what I've been showing you here so far is more like the finished product. What really happens is, when I come in the first day and I break the news to them that they're actually going to have to touch each other, our starting point is more like this. The dynamic very insightfully rendered here by one of my students. You get the idea. I once had a kid who faked a seizure. But by day 2, I'm just back for more, and the seizure kid has clearly exhausted his material. So when he sees that I'm offering him a chance to get out of his chair for a change, he'll usually decide to give it a try, but still with the attitude. So at this point, we see body language that looks about like this. Once I get him up there, though, he has a pattern of steps he can puzzle over. And we teach with a lot of imagery and storytelling. This is all while we're getting him to move in this controlled and elegant way. The science now shows us that the way you carry yourself actually affects your physiology. So the more we reinforce all this, the more he embodies that state of focus instead of stress and antagonism. That's where you begin to get self-regulation. Grit, confidence, better relationships. Mastering this is a big deal when you're 10. So what does that mean for all the other things you assumed were too difficult or too unpleasant? So once they make that connection, that's when we've really got them on board. Because now they're more interested in the challenge than they are hung up about touching each other. I once had a boy who was new to his school from Cape Verde. And because he spoke almost no English, he struggled a lot, was very shy. But from day 1, he was the best dancer in his class. And so everyone was clamoring to work with him. And it helped start to bridge that gap. So this is the part where we can start to talk about things like manners, eye contact, attention to detail, trust. At this stage, they start to dance more like this and like this. Because if you make it fun, if you make it engaging, they really rise to the occasion. They surprise themselves and the adults around them. So I once had a school in the South Bronx where the kids actually took voluntarily to escorting their partners through the halls. Then I went overboard with the praise and then got self-conscious and stopped. But we don't do this by appealing to discipline or willpower or things that anyone who's ever been on a diet will tell you are exhausting and not much fun. Because I think a lot of the time we talk about character being important, but we don't give kids a chance to experience it directly and face-to-face. Instead, what do? We say, go sit in the corner and reflect your way into respecting another person. Then we're going to force you to apologize. We keep expecting to see abstract social skills primarily enforced through simple carrots and sticks, and we wonder why our problems with negative behavior and disengagement don't go anywhere. I once had a student who was known for getting in fights almost every week, and she gave me hell in the classroom, too. But her principal noticed that she had stopped being so aggressive, and she told him that it was because she liked what they learned in ballroom about being treated like a lady. So sometimes it's just about finding the right challenge that's actually going to resonate with them. But as much as I get to see results, I do get discouraged. Because if I ever get any pushback, if I ever get teachers who don't buy in, it's because they're worried about what they might be giving up by taking the time to work on this. And when I think of the pressure they're under to teach solely to the ends of grading and test scores, I can hardly argue with them. I'm afraid that we've bought into this really unhelpful trade-off between cognitive and non-cognitive learning. And so we're squeezing out so many of the very processes and activities through which kids become capable of learning and succeeding. This is something we can start to reverse now. While all our debates rage in education policy, social and emotional learning is a basic upgrade that we can make to the learning environment itself, everywhere. And when you consider the trends that this generation is looking at, it's quite clear that we need to. We can acknowledge that the valuable skill set of the future has a lot more of tools like communication skills, executive function, even creativity, than it has rote academic knowledge. So my hope is that we start the movement of life skills, and that we support creative ways of getting them in the classroom, getting them researched or funded, getting them to scale. If you're a parent or an educator, insist on social and emotional curriculum. Learn to spot the results in your kids. Let's embrace a new paradigm where character education is satisfying and empowering instead of paternalistic, where we devote classroom time to skills that keep students engaged for the long haul and make the rest of their learning stickier. Because the important ingredients of achievement are turning out to be far more nuanced than we thought they were. But they may also be more malleable as well. And some of the best lessons may not look at first like any learning as we knew it at all. So maybe it's time we took a second look at something that seemed like just a dance. Thank you.